Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. Ray's Talk Show is the home for conversation on politics and current events that are impacting our lives and what we can do about it. In doing so, we also like to provide you a Latino perspective in these debates, including the hundreds of thousands of Latinos that make Las Vegas and the great state of Nevada great, who are dealing with some very sad times today. We're with you, our brothers and sisters in Nevada and around the world. You can subscribe to Ray's Talk Show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, anywhere you can find a podcast, or check out our website, rayspodcast.com. Follow us and engage us in conversation on Twitter at Ray's Podcast. And you can always email your host, Ray Collazo, at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. If you follow us on social media, we know we don't get much sleep. Today is a very special episode of Ray's Talk Show. We're going to talk later in the show about what this tragic event in Las Vegas over the weekend means for the gun control debate in this country. We're also going to get into teeing up the next legislative battle our community has in Washington related to budget, taxes, and I may give you a little tidbit about some interesting political developments in the Southwest. But first, let's introduce a great friend to the show, a new friend to the show, who not only is a very loyal supporter of Ray's Talk Show and listener of the Ray's Talk Show and the Ray's movement, but has his own podcast, podcaster, activist, and new bestie, my new homeboy, calling in from the Great Northwest, Leo Perales. Leo, welcome to Ray's Talk Show.
Hey, how's it going, Ray? I appreciate this opportunity. I'm really happy right now. Cardi B's #1 on the charts. I'm doing good. That's the one thing that's keeping me optimistic in this world right now.
I'm telling you, much respect, Cardi B. She gets a lot of shout-outs on the show. I was actually, it's so funny because I'm old enough now to have to explain to people my age about the Cardi B and Latin trap phenomenon. Much respect to people like, some of these young boys that you're going to be hearing more about following in the Latin trap tradition, like Bad Bunny and Messiah and Artistas. Yeah, I try to keep up with what's going on with the young people, Leo. But Leo, you're a podcaster, and we're going to hear more about what you have going on this week on the Perales Report. But tell people a little bit about yourself and about your podcast.
Yeah, again, I'm over here in the little state of Washington, over here in the northwest corner of the nation. Yeah, I started doing a podcast a couple months ago. I've been getting really involved in my community. So on my show, I like to interview city council candidates, port commissioner candidates, county commissioner candidates, and provide people and these individuals more exposure, and also just ask them questions. So I've kind of became almost a local journalist, freelancer. And I'm just going out asking them questions. We just had a big decision in regards to marijuana. They just outlawed marijuana here in the county, and I went and talked to some individuals about that. So, again, I'm just on the ground, and I'm trying to be the people's voice. But I also am an activist. I'm also, if you want to say politician, I did run for local city council here at one point. Didn't win, so I have to keep my day job. But, yeah, no, I'm just down here representing for the Latino community, being their voice, and just trying to help out my community over here.
Well, Leo, we really appreciate all your efforts out there and all your leadership in the far Northwest, the Great Northwest. Love that part of the country. And Leo was very impressed by my geography skills when he said, you may not know where I'm from. I'm like, that's the Yakima Valley. Much respect to Rudy Lopez, a great friend of mine who reached out today that has done some organizing in that part of the world, who schooled me on what's up there in the Yakima Valley. But Leo, we're going to talk in a moment about Puerto Rico, and a little later in the show, a little bit more about what the Las Vegas, this tragedy that's happened in Las Vegas, the biggest mass shooting in human history, means politically for the gun control debate moving forward in this country. But first, just really quickly, our hearts go out to our friends. We have so many friends, so many wonderful people in Las Vegas. I was just there weeks ago. I was literally staying across the street from the MGM, and I know, Leo, when these sort of things happen, we just get, it's just very emotional and traumatic for all of us, particularly when it hits communities like Las Vegas that we have so much love and so many relationships in.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, when I heard that it happened Sunday morning, I wake up, always look at my phone. Just initially, I just felt disgusted and ashamed just living in a country that we're just becoming so divided, if that is the motive of this individual. But just like you, I was in Las Vegas. I actually went to a show at the Mandalay Bay a couple months ago. So that really shook me to my core, because I was there, and it just seems like you can't go anywhere these days. And I think, to me, the worst part is that this man he won't see justice. It really, in the backdrop of it all, is this gun debate. Are we going to have a gun debate? Initial reports from the White House is that they don't want to have this conversation right now. But after over 500 people get hurt and they go to the hospital, almost 60 people are killed. How can you not have the debate now?
No, and again, on a personal level, again, so many friends. When I woke up, I had already fallen asleep on the East Coast. So when I woke up, it was already several hours in this tragedy, and trying to, I think we're up to over 59 deaths and over 560 injuries at this point. And, my first thought was just my dear friends. And I was hesitant because when I woke up, it was only like 3-4 in the morning in the West Coast. So I waited a few hours to start texting great friends like Marco Rauda and Cynthia Zenmenio, who then informed me that she was also considering going to that show, and just decided that, I got to go to work on Monday morning, and just didn't go, and heard that story from a few other associates. But, anytime it hits home like this, we, unfortunately, in our community, we're used to having gun violence around us. In inner city Philadelphia, where I grew up, I was just hanging out with my dad somewhere, and we were at the wrong place at the wrong time and got caught up in the crossfire. My dad was shot, and I could have lost my dad that night if it had been a higher caliber bullet or hadn't hit the biggest part of his belly. I may not have my father with us today. Having dealt with that trauma as a witness, and victimized by it, it's something that I'm very sensitive to, and it's something, again, when we talk about it a little more later in the show. But the first thing is that we have to support the victims and support the community in Las Vegas. We have friends that are very engaged in the blood donation drive, which they're at capacity, and they're getting sufficient blood just from the local community there to support the victims. And there's lots of grief counseling happening, lots of organizing on a spiritual level happening. So even in the midst of this disaster and this tragedy, there's a lot of hope and a lot of positivity and a lot of unity coming through in the Las Vegas community. And again, our thoughts and prayers for you guys. And we'll talk a moment about what this means for the larger gun control debate and the larger discussion about violence in our country, and how we need to address it and stop just sending our thoughts and prayers. Leo, I know that being on the West Coast, you as we started collaborating and discussing these shows, the first thing that came to mind when we started having this conversation, you were like, well, of course we're going to talk about Puerto Rico. So I definitely wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to help us tee up that segment. Yeah, no doubt.
It was definitely in my mind throughout the past week when you start seeing these reports come out. But, we have a president who wants to talk about kneeling football players and about telling owners to fire people. No doubt. First off, being somebody, who is of Puerto Rican descent, you have family members and stuff. How are the efforts been to you in terms of the response by the federal government?
It's really interesting because it's amazing how this president can create division and these sort of divisive side conversations that really don't speak to the larger issue. So, I want people to be clear. What we've been debating the last 48 hours is really, was it an F grade or a C grade? Because even the 3-star general that was brought in just a few days ago acknowledged he didn't have enough support. There wasn't enough on the ground to be done. We're still talking about an effort that's going to take quite a bit of time to rebuild the electrical grid on the island. It hasn't even really begun. So to those that are trying to defend this president, I would ask you to just listen to what his own 3-star general is saying, what his own FEMA staff is saying. They do not have the resources, and they did not plan for this. And when you start creating excuses like, well, Puerto Rico's an island. There's a lot of mountains there. The infrastructure is not the best. Well, those are all things you knew 2 weeks ago. And hurricanes don't sneak up on you. So the bottom line is, when you hear these sort of excuses, that's what they are. And so we can debate. I'm not on the island. I have one perspective. I have one, I'm looking at many sources of information. But the bottom line is that it's pretty clear to me that the response was insufficient and been slow. Now, are there day to day? Are things going to improve? Are we slowly going to see improvement? Sure. The boat, I forget the name of the ship, but the ship that's, like a hospital cruiser has now made it to Puerto Rico. That's going to be a great help. There's other resources, both from the federal government, but also the private sector, that are getting there more and more each day. But let's not fool ourselves. This was at best a C- job. And I guess my question to anyone that questions that is, what exactly does this president manage well at all? Whether it's his personal finances, whether it's having a legislative agenda, which, even though his party controls both the Congress and the Senate, cannot get anything accomplished, including their personal priorities. I see no reason why, and we'll get into the salacious stuff in a second, why anyone would believe that there's anything more than a half-assed job being done, that, thank God, people like certain people in the media and the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, have the bravery to stand up to.
But it just seems like, shouldn't we have learned anything from Katrina? Don't you think we kind of know, like you said, there's science behind these hurricanes. They know when it's going to meet landfall. Why wasn't there no one being proactive? I mean, it took 6 days for them to waive the Jones Act. That's what I mean. Like, are the Puerto Ricans just pissed off at this point at this president from what you're hearing? Are you hearing anything like that?
Overwhelmingly so. You do have now, for folks, the apologists, they are a small number, and I'll talk about more of them in a second, of people that, are supporters of the governor of Puerto Rico, Ricardo Rosselló, Ricky Jr. His dad was the governor many years ago, a few years back, and his administration, who's tried to play the good cop, bad cop role in this whole situation to try to ingratiate themselves with the administration for more resources. I mean, I'll even assume he's doing it for good intentions. But the bottom line is that if you have any Puerto Rican friends in your life and you're on Facebook, you're on social media, you're seeing, first of all, the anxiety. Can you imagine, Leo? I mean, and again, we're not forgetting about the earthquakes in Mexico, and other natural disasters that happen in the Caribbean around the world. But you have to understand the geography of this was such, and the scope and the magnitude of this hurricane was such, and the island is so small, relatively speaking, that this hurricane touched the entire island and essentially touched virtually every Puerto Rican in the world. So you have an entire ethnic group that is suffering essentially equally together in this, and not knowing. Could you imagine not knowing? I had uncles and aunts I didn't talk to, or my mother didn't talk to her brothers and sisters until 2 or 3 days ago. Could you imagine, Leo, not being able to communicate with a loved one for days and days, knowing they're on a mountain, knowing they may be elderly, knowing they're poor, knowing they have, a house that isn't in the best of condition, or feeling like they may be prepared, but not being able to talk to them. So you can imagine, in the midst of that kind of stress, that kind of collective anxiety, you have a president who finally gets to Puerto Rico, who finally seems to be paying some attention to the issue, and even in the midst of the increased support, belittles the island for its economic woes, belittles the Puerto Rican people by insinuating that we're lazy, our truckers aren't showing up. And doesn't even have to have an honest conversation, a real conversation with a leader like the mayor of the largest city on the island, Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz, who he basically disrespected today by shaking her hand and not responding to her initial discussion. So we're talking about a community globally, in our diaspora, as we refer to it, that's distressed. And there's the infuriation increases not just because of the fear and the anxiety of making sure you can contact loved ones. This gentleman compiling that with his disrespect of our community, and then the extra anxiety of with this realization with Puerto Ricans on the States and on the island, that this is how American citizens are being treated. So you could just imagine the increased anxiety and frustration that our Puerto Rican nation worldwide is feeling.
Right. No, I mean, exactly. And I just feel like there's this thing, like you were talking about, how the way he shook her hand, how he's just not responding to the mayor of San Juan. And a couple of those tweets that he sent out over the weekend stand out to me. And one of them was using the word they. They always want everything done for them. What kind of message does that send to Puerto Rico, to people living here in here in the United States? Because I mean,
no, it's very interesting, and I shared this, and people that are on my personal Facebook feed saw this, and I'll put it in the show. I'll put the video on the show notes on racepodcast.com. You can see it. So I did like a 3-minute video related to that this harkened back to the kind of stereotypes and the kind of discrimination that Puerto Rican communities, particularly in the northeast part of this country, have experienced for decades. I mean, Donald Trump is the epitome of like the Archie Bunker, the cranky old white New Yorker that thought of blacks as street criminals, thought of Puerto Ricans as lazy street criminals, and just these tired stereotypes which go back to, someone was referencing West Side Story, that this was the kind of stereotypes and imagery and language that people used to talk about Puerto Ricans 30, 40 years ago, and quite honestly has hovered as a stereotype and impediment to our community my entire life. I mean, this kind of stereotypes, this sort of language is what has unfortunately permeated and has really led to a lot of people not having a good self-image of themselves. And so this is really getting at the core of something that's much deeper, as it relates to how people are discriminated against as much mentally as it is by this kind of language and these kind of stereotypes heaped upon them, as hard policy. And so that really resonated with a lot of people in my Facebook social media community, because it really spoke to the kind of talk that is in accusations and stereotypes that are heaped on many communities of color. I mean, thinking about the lazy Mexican stereotype, or the now this illegal, this concept that Mexicans are taking something from this country. Mexican Americans have been part of this country before it was the United States. So that's it goes into this same narrative that this president, this administration, and this radical right-wing agenda that controls the politics of this country, that people of color are takers, people of color are lazy, people of color are criminals, and people of color aren't real Americans. And that's the overarching challenge that we're dealing with, Leo.
No doubt. It's just the lackadaisical response from the White House. When you have people like Low Energy Jeb saying you need to step it up and nothing's happening, it's just mind-boggling. But do you think that this posh response to the Hurricane Maria will have any future electoral consequences?
Well, it's interesting that people are going there, and we do have, even before this hurricane, for people that don't follow it as closely, we've had, and that's a whole other several episodes to get into, and there's definitely lots of blame to go around as it relates to the Puerto Rican, the economic crisis that preceded this natural disaster, which is one of and there being a pretty significant debt on the budget of the island of Puerto Rico that the president has referenced, and how that came about is a whole other conversation. But the bottom line is that there had been a pretty significant migration, mostly to Florida, and more specifically Central Florida. People have often heard about the I-4 corridor, the greater Orlando area, going down to Tampa and Daytona, that whole strip. But there's Puerto Ricans, particularly of the professional class, that have relocated all over the country because of the economic crisis of the island, the brain drain that's happening on the island. I have relatives in Texas. We have, and if you've seen some of the relief efforts from Puerto Ricans all over the mainland United States, Corpus Christi, Texas, L.A., Denver, Colorado. I mean, it's Puerto Ricans organizing all over the place around this issue, and that's because of the disbursement, because of the economic issues on the island. And so, yeah, I definitely see, and we'll see about next year in Florida specifically, and potentially states like Pennsylvania, where Puerto Ricans as a swing vote can make a big difference. But I think the bigger issue for the Puerto Rican community is, how do we take this moment, and I'm not talking about the status issue, I'm not talking about voting per se, But the bigger question is, how does the Puerto Rican community now continue to rally behind our community in a way that builds power, whether that's economic power on the island in the form of, there's lots of discussions amongst my network of friends about how we now need to buy real estate on the island. We cannot allow this opportunity of venture capitalists to make Puerto Rico a mini Hawaii. We can't allow this opportunity to go past and not continue to organize in this way. I mean, think about it, Leo. If you just think about the celebrity class, you think about, there isn't a Puerto Rican community in this country that people are donating goods, donating money. There will be hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars raised through Puerto Rican community grassroots fundraising efforts. So how do we hone this power in a way that moves us forward so that we can hold our elected officials on the island more accountable? We can have a stronger economy on the island. We can have a stronger economy and stronger political voice in the mainland of this country. So those are the bigger questions, because what we've seen is, in this moment of tragedy, which obviously the mayor Yulín is the poster child of at this point, of sort of Puerto Rican leadership, but across the country and across the world, through philanthropy, through organizing, through media messaging. I mean, you can ask a community to do more for itself at this moment. By the fundraising and other efforts that happen. So there's lots of positives that can come out of it, but we have to continue this momentum, because we have to, first of all, make sure we can save everyone's life on the island, because that's the first issue. And as we rebuild, there's going to be many bigger questions, including our electoral voting power in the mainland United States.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I hate to look at it from in a kind of electoral politics lens, but really, I mean, when you have Republican operatives like Rick Wilson saying that he thinks this hurricane could be a game changer, and because the way I look at it is this: right now, we want a comforter in chief in President Donald Trump, but we're not going to get that. That's not him, right? He likes to go after women. You know, like a year ago, he was denigrating Mrs. Machado, and you know, this is just kind of who he is. But you know, this is nothing new. You know, you saw after Hurricane Katrina, people migrating to Texas, and then, you know, almost 500,000 people. I really do think this is going to come back to bite the Republicans in the rear end. I mean, that's why you have people like Senator Marco Rubio and Rick Scott out there trying to, hey, you know, we're good people too. I just don't see this in the long run being good for them in 2018. I just don't.
Well, I mean, in Florida would be the most obvious example, right? We have a large affiliate. We have a Senate race and a governor's race that'll be sort of the hot elections in Florida next year, where the Puerto Rican vote could definitely be the difference. But ultimately, this is going to be about that. That will happen as a result of Puerto Ricans organizing themselves, because the Democratic Party has consistently had this opportunity. And we saw in 2008, 2012, through squeaker elections, where Obama's organization, wasn't really the Democratic organization, was able to tap into the Puerto Rican electorate and get record turnouts. Hillary still won the bulk of the Puerto Rican vote in Florida, but the Democratic energy, the Democratic organization to authentically engage the Puerto Rican vote, not only in places like Florida, but places like Pennsylvania, where I can tell you, Leo, they did a horrendous job engaging the Latino Puerto Rican electorate in a swing state like Pennsylvania, and they paid the price for that. So I don't have a lot of hope that I could be wrong, but that the Democrats per se are going to get it and engage this electorate in an authentic, long-term way. So it's going to be incumbent on the Puerto Rican community, in this case in Florida and other swing states, to not only help the Puerto Ricans that may be coming displaced by this hurricane, to help them basically, get set up in their social services and their housing, but then to engage those people, register them to vote, and engage them in local electoral politics, because it's clear to me that political parties, quite frankly, are not doing it. And we're going to have to continue to find outlets, and this speaks to the bigger Latino vote question in this country, where we can do it, fund it, organize it ourselves.
Right. Yeah, no, there's no doubt. I mean, both parties are not well liked by lots of individuals right now. right now the Democratic Party's trying to look for somebody to be their leader, and they just can't find anybody. But yeah, no, I'm still. This is definitely Puerto Rico, something that needs to be monitored, and I haven't really seen any reports coming up. Coming out today in regards to how President Trump's visit went today. So only time will tell if he can kind of start acting more presidential. I don't really see that happening. I think he himself in the White House has put their foot in their mouth way too many times, and this is the president we're just going to have.
Let me tell you something. He was an absolute disaster on the island today. And amongst the many highlights, he literally was throwing paper towels at people, like in the form of shooting a basketball. So incredibly disrespectful. Many comments that were belittling of Puerto Ricans, and belittling of the situation, the dire situation that many people are experiencing. So he is indeed, to paraphrase another NBC TV show, the biggest loser. There's no question about it. If you listen to Ray's Talk Show, you can check out this and every episode of Ray's Talk Show on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, anywhere. You can download a podcast or check out all of our content at rayspodcast.com. That's RAYS podcast.com. A lot of my Facebook live videos for people who don't follow me on Facebook, even though you should, at Ray's Podcast. You can check out there as well. You can email me at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. Leo, let people know where they can follow you on social media, and then we'll get into our next segment.
Yeah, please. You can look me up on Instagram, Leo_A_Perales, and go to my YouTube channel. Subscribe. It's called The Perales Report. Again, we're right now we're going to start doing a series on DACA students and recipients. So please go to the YouTube channel. You can also find me on SoundCloud, The Perales Report. Subscribe. Good content. Share with your friends.
Yeah, no, and Leo, you were sharing with me and talking about this before the show started. Talking about the tragedy that happened in Las Vegas over the last few days. And our folks are still dealing with that tragedy. Much love to all our folks out there with their blood drives. And we have nothing but love and support for our folks in Vegas. That there was actually this hits very close to home because there was a recent incident in your part of the world as well.
Right. Yeah, a couple weeks ago we had a mass shooting at a Spokane high school, about 200 miles up the road from where I live, and it just hits home because these are really frequent now. I just saw a staggering statistic today that we've had over 1,500 mass shootings since 2013. 1,500. I can't believe. I mean, that's one a day essentially for the last couple years. It's amazing, and when you have young kids like I do, whether it's in a school or it's just going to a venue down the road from your house, it just makes me wonder how we cannot have an adult conversation about guns, and how we cannot put in motion just common sense gun restrictions. I think this shooting is going to have lasting effects. I really do. I know there's individuals who wish that they would have saw something change back when Sandy Hook took place. But a lot of people are just really insensitive. And I hate to make this correlation, but there is a lot of people who listen to country music who tend to be Republican. But the shooting of Sunday night is going to touch a lot of people, and it already has. I mean, when you have 22,000 people attend a festival like that, they're from around the nation. I actually talked to somebody a few days ago. Never met him in my life. He told me about the shooting, and one of his friends was there. He got killed. So how rare is that? I mean, that's just. I mean, the guy I've never met before. He asked me if I heard about it. I'm like, yeah, I was just reading about it, and he just tells me, yeah, one of my friends went, and he got killed. So it just makes you think. It really does. But I think this is going to be something that's going to really affect change in the long run, mainly because there was supposed to be an NRA-endorsed bill supposed to come up this week called the SHARE Act. That has since been shelved because it's just insensitive to put forward, more. We want to expand people's gun rights, but that's the NRA position. But to do that at this time, it would just be too insensitive. And that bill would actually make it more easier for individuals to get noise suppressors. Right? So if you have a noise suppressor, you could do a lot more damage. If that person had a noise suppressor, you wouldn't have heard anything. barely, and it's just a matter of hearing that gunshots that made people react so fast, and you had the local authorities show up that quick. But yeah, it just really hits to home. I mean, again, almost 600 people were almost killed or injured. It's a tragedy, and I really hope we start putting forward common sense restrictions on guns.
Well, this is it's one of the hardest issues that we're dealing with as a nation. We have a vast majority of people in this country that support, on some level, some form of tighter gun laws, particularly stricter background checks. And because of the NRA's perceived power, because of the current makeup, not only in its ideological nature, that it's, we have not only Republican-controlled Congress and Senate, but a pretty conservative network. We have people, those members coming from gerrymandered districts where there isn't much competitiveness, and if anything, they're much more concerned about being challenged by the right than in a general election against a Democrat. And frankly, the lack of leadership by those that even conservative Republicans, with a few exceptions, actually very few exceptions, would have the guts and the leadership to stand up to the NRA to propose and work on bipartisan solutions. So the vast majority of us are left in a lurch. We're left to organize. And obviously, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg has, after the Sandy Hook tragedy, invested a significant amount of money to raise awareness through the media and run campaigns against some of these candidates. But it's going to take a lot of organizing. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of energy. But like everything in politics, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. If you had told African-American leaders right after World War II that within 20 years we would have civil rights legislation passed and that would eventually lead to having a black president in some of their lifetimes, they probably wouldn't have believed you. But we have to continue the energy, continue to follow the leadership of people like Nelba Marquez Green, the Latina mother who lost her daughter tragically at Sandy Hook. That continues. I follow her closely on Twitter. Continues to lead. Continues to be a voice for the voiceless in this debate. Jimmy Kimmel last night gave an impassioned, had some impassioned remarks in his monologue about the need for common sense reforms. And look, is gun control the only issue that we have to tackle to prevent these mass attacks? Absolutely not. There's mental health. There's mental health issues. There's we have to look at the influence of these video games. I mean, I'm down with putting everything on the table, and I'm down with trying everything. But my question to folks in Congress, like people like Speaker Ryan today, who said, "Oh, this is about mental health," is that how can you say with a straight face that A, this is not the time to talk about it, B, it's not about guns, and C, it's about mental health issues and looking at reforming mental health, when you're the same speaker that put on the floor of the U.S. Congress just months ago and whipped the votes to pass healthcare reform that would take over $1 trillion out of the Medicaid system and the healthcare system, and particularly gutting Medicaid, which was the primary resource for people to access mental health counseling, opioid addiction counseling, methamphetamine pill counseling, which are some of the factors that are leading to some of these issues. So how could you say he could say with a straight face that it's a mental health problem? Well, he just spent the last 6 months trying to gut our mental health medical system. So there's just a lot of spinelessness in Washington, and we just have to organize against it.
Yeah, I mean, just makes me laugh when a lot of things you were just saying right now. It's about personal responsibility. It's about reducing the deficit. I mean, that's what all Paul Ryan. That's all he thinks about. But I really do feel like this conversation needs to be had, because to me, it's a culture thing. The Second Amendment, people owning guns. I mean, we own more guns than half the. I mean, we're like the United States is 4.4% population of the whole world, but we own more than half of all the guns made. It's a culture thing. But like you were talking about mental health, this Stephen Paddock guy, which that will be the only time I say his name because I don't think we should kind of sensationalize these types of incidences. There was no mental health as of right now. That there was no symptoms. I mean, this guy was he was an accountant. He worked for Lockheed Martin. He lived in retirement home over in Nevada. People said, oh, he just was a quiet guy. But for one thing, and I hate to go this way, the one thing I do notice with a lot of these mass shootings, it's a Caucasian person. And that's what I kind of see in my neck of the woods. We have a lot of individuals here in Washington that are gun-toting persons, and they tend to be white. They walk into the Starbucks with the AR-15 strapped to their back. It's a culture thing, and it's been compounded for years. You have, the NRA lobby doing this for years now, 20, 30 years. That's the same lobby. These are the same people that when President Obama was in office said that he's going to take away your guns, and he didn't do anything the whole time he was in office. He tried to get something done with Sandy Hook. Nothing happened. I hope something gets done, and I hope now is time for the conversation. And when you have big name celebrities coming out like Jason Aldean, who was on stage when it happened, he's even rethinking his position on guns after he was almost killed.
Yeah, no, and it's so frustrating because we have to continue to even discuss. The media really has to take a look. It's not the biggest issue in all of this, but they really have to take a look at how they message and how they don't call our elected official accountable to the language. It's almost like we're almost having two sets of conversations. One, when you have the white male that commits these crimes, which are the overwhelming majority of the people that are committing these sort of mass murders type crimes in this country over the last several years, they're just one crazy lone nut. The lone wolf, right? And when anyone else does it, whether it's a person of color, particularly someone of Middle Eastern and Muslim descent, they're defined as a terrorist, and they're defined in much different tones. So it's even in this issue around the Second Amendment and gun control rights, we're still dealing with lots of double standards that and since we're not dealing with them in our larger conversations, it's allowing this division. Hey, look, there's all kind of Latinos that are like to have their guns for lots of reasons. First of all, hey, there were Latinos at that country music concert. They enjoy the culture of the West, enjoy the rural lifestyle, Texans and people from Colorado, and wear cowboy hats, and they're part of this Americana as well. And there's people in the hood that need to protect themselves because they live in dangerous neighborhoods, or they perceive them as dangerous neighborhoods. So, there's no, from our community, you're not going to get a sentiment of eliminate every gun in this society. What we're looking for is common sense solutions. One of the factors is obviously we have way too many guns in circulation and way too many high caliber weapons that are in circulation. Too many loopholes. The gun show thing. There's just obviously the background checks are not sufficient. There's mishmash of state laws. So again, we've got to continue to organize and be smart. There's a holistic solution. It's not just about guns, but to sit here and think that the Republicans that control the House and Senate have any credibility in this subject when, again, even if they want to talk about mental health and health-related factors, which are absolutely a factor, they've spent the last 8 months trying to gut the system that would address that issue. So they're hypocrites in even bringing that up. They're hypocrites with this idea that now is not the time, by the way, because Donald Trump, in the middle of, as people are starving in Puerto Rico, 3.5 million citizens have no electricity, very little water, and very little food, he's slapping our hand about a debt that we could sit here and argue how it was created, but certainly, economic issues that almost none of these people on the island have anything to do with causing, get brought up in the middle of this disaster. So they find time to talk about whatever they want, whenever they want. So it's time for us to call them out on that. And again, you're listening to Ray's Talk Show. Ray Collazo is riled up. It is a Tuesday night. And I am in parts unknown in an undisclosed location having a great conversation with my main man, Leo Perales. I got a lot of great Leos in my life. Prieto Leo Cruz, lots of good homies. So I know we would have a good connection, Leo. Before we get to the last segment of the show, let people let them know where they can find the Perales Report and your social media.
Yeah, please go to YouTube, search in the search bar, the Perales Report. It'll come right up. I have tons of videos, tons of interviews with very interesting people in my neck of the woods. This program is getting lots of good coverage. It's getting momentum. Hopefully I'll be interviewing the governor one of these days, put him on the hot seat over here. You can follow me on Twitter at Leo A. Perales. I'm always posting stuff from my Perales Report podcast. I'm always retweeting Ray. He's always putting out good stuff too. And I'm just providing the people with information, and I'm just trying to be the voice for my community. So please go to those mediums.
I'd like to see on your show, Leo, is a lot of people don't realize, but there is actually a Latina member of Congress that represents Washington State, Jaime Herrera Bueller, who was, I believe, part of the 2010, if I'm not mistaken, Tea Party wave, a fiscal conservative who's actually been relatively moderate in Congress, and a very interesting political figure that is sort of under the radar to many people. So would like to see her on the Perales Report, Leo.
Yeah, hey, if she wants to come on, hopefully I can make a trip down to the west side here soon. Again, I'm just going around networking, trying to get people on. I don't think she's as conservative as we think we are. As we think she is. I think she had to run Republican so she could win. So God bless her. But yeah, definitely we want to have everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Jaime Herrera Bueller, someone we can work with. That Puerto Rican guy in Idaho, though. He's another story, and I will rip into him. I don't even know if he's gone to what a disgrace. With the Puerto Rico thing, he's totally ignored it. Anyway, but running for governor of that great state. So anyway, we'll have time to talk about him another time. The last segment of this episode of Ray's Talk Show, and again, really appreciate everyone, the feedback, particularly on social media, that we've gotten about our Puerto Rico content and other issues we've been discussing on the show over the last several weeks. Really appreciate all of our friends and family out there, and we're going to have, Leo and I are going to be bringing on more guests to talk about some of these issues in the coming days. But we wanted to do a segment, sort of what we were looking out for this week, give people an idea of the headlines that you're going to be seeing over the next couple days that you should be paying attention to. And I wanted to give Leo the first shot at sharing something that he's following in the news that is of particular interest.
Yeah, I'm always looking out for stuff. I think first and foremost, I'm looking out for President Trump to do his job. And next time not to be sending out a botched response.
Don't hold your breath, man.
Yeah, I know, but I think that's, to me, that's priority right now. Puerto Rico, much love from Washington State. But for me, the second thing would be this Russian probe. I think it's going to start heating up a lot more when they essentially, they have threatened to indict Paul Manafort, which, if people don't know who he is, he was the ex-chair for the Donald Trump campaign. This is a guy who was looking to make money, because that's all he thinks about. He looks to make money. He thinks about that black caviar. If you're not into with that, the Mueller investigation has just finally gotten about 10,000 emails, and they're combing through them right now. I think they're going to find some very interesting stuff, and really we're going to start seeing, I really do think, a coordinated effort with Russia to meddle in with the 2016 U.S. election, and that's also kind of goes into this next thing about Russian Facebook ads, and that almost reached 10 million people here on Facebook. So more than likely, you probably at least saw an ad for during this election. So this was very broad, and I think a lot of things are going to come to light, and I'm looking forward to seeing justice in that regard.
No, and it's interesting that every time Mueller gets closer, where there's a seminal event, you get a Washington Post story about him getting access to tax returns to the IRS, him, the FBI raid on Paul Manafort's house, the impending indictment. As these news headlines come up, it's amazing how he finds another boogeyman. All of a sudden, it's NFL players, or putting down Puerto Rico, or rescinding DACA. So every time the news gets closer to him, he lashes out at people of color and does something salacious to distract us. Oh, North Korea, by the way. Notice it's always people of color that he has these issues with. Incredibly enough, but no, that's definitely something we're going to be. And I know I was at at a rally the other day for healthcare to protect the Affordable Care Act, and a gentleman had "Hurry Up Mueller" T-shirt. So I think we all we're rooting for Mueller to get it done for sure. Well, I got a couple things. First of all, want to give people a little sense of some of the feedback we get here on Ray's Talk Show. I put out on Facebook a little while ago. What do people want to hear on the show today, or what comments do they have? And I got two things here. Conchita Reyes, you heard a few episodes ago on the show talk about her relief efforts from being sort of saving herself and her family to then becoming a first responder in Houston. And we never forget about our folks in Texas, Beaumont, Houston, Corpus, those areas that got are still recovering from their natural disaster. Our folks in Florida, our folks in Mexico. So we're our folks in the Caribbean, the other islands. So all of you are on our minds as we're dealing with a collective recovery here. But Conchita makes a good point. What would it take for the 55 million Latinos in this country to truly rise up and go vote in 2018? We're going to talk about that in other shows, but I just wanted to give a sense to people. We have to organize ourselves, and that's not only going to involve organizing, that's going to involve philanthropy. We need money to fund these projects, and we're going to talk more about that in coming weeks and months on this Ray's Talk Show. The Latino voter registration has been a big part of my career, so I definitely have lots of thoughts about that, but I'm glad, Conchita, you're thinking about it. It would help if our folks in Virginia, New Jersey come out in big numbers in November for sure. Those are elections coming up in the coming weeks. And I wanted to read something that our great friend James Garcia, again, another someone else who was on the show recently, put. James Garcia wrote today. He summed up what the GOP discussed today. Let's talk about tax cuts, not 59 victims of a gun massacre. So that's the kind of feedback, that's kind of interaction, that's kind of thoughtfulness that you hear not only by myself and guests like Leo Perales, but the entire Ray's Talk Show community. So two quick things. One is from a Washington, D.C. perspective. We've got, in the midst of all this nonsense happening in the White House and the energy we're putting into relief efforts all over the country and all over the world, we have a budget to pass. And so we have to be very diligent to pay attention to this process. Among many lowlights, the Republicans in the House and Senate are trying to cut anti-poverty programs that literally feed poor children in our community, like SNAP, like housing subsidies, like workforce development programs, like education programs that literally save lives, give people a boost in our society. So we're very concerned about the potential anti-poverty program cuts, which are a sliver, are a drop in the ocean. If you think about $500 billion that is spent every year by U.S. military, this is a fraction of that kind of money. But again, programs that literally that feed people that would not have those kind of resources. So we have to be diligent to pay attention to that process. And there's many other sort of hidden loopholes within the tax reform discussion that would severely impact the Latino community. We'll be talking about more in the coming weeks. And then, Leo, I'm always road tripping, and I was just in Arizona recently, and a lot of energy out there, a lot of good people like Petra Falcon, a lot of great leaders, Max Gonzalez, and a lot of great friends out there. And, the wounds in Arizona are still very fresh from not only the rescinding of DACA, but also the pardoning of Sheriff Jar Arpaio. So what's happening in Arizona is going to be a centerpiece of the Latino organizing work we're going to do. We have a governor's race and a Senate race coming up. And one of the things that was an interesting new development in the Senate race featuring incumbent Jeff Flake, the Republican out of Arizona, who is no friend of President Trump's, is that a pretty prominent Democrat, Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema, threw her hat into the race. Now, Kyrsten Sinema is very interesting because in her time as an activist and state legislator in Arizona, she was an ultra liberal, I'd say in the Bernie Sanders camp at least, and was often considered the most Latina member of the Arizona legislature because of her very pro-immigrant, pro-Latino views. After winning a very competitive congressional district in Arizona, leans Republican slightly. She's moderated extremely and is one of the more conservative Democratic members in the in the U.S. Congress. Her latest shameful vote, in my opinion, was voting in the House Budget Reconciliation Bill for border wall funding, which only 5 other Democrats did. So while some who maybe remember Kyrsten from her real progressive days and also gets a lot of headlines for her eccentric personality and being the first openly bisexual member of U.S. Congress, who have not been paying attention don't realize that she's actually come really damn conservative. So it'll be interesting to see how Senator Flake defends his right flank in the primaries. He's probably going to run against a Steve Bannon funded candidate in the primaries, but also how he reacts to potentially either running against someone like Kyrsten Sinema, a conservative Democrat, who will probably gain a lot of attention because of her personality and her personal story. So, Leo, I know you Washington guys don't want to admit it, the whole Pac-12 thing, but I know you got a little love for Arizona too.
Oh, heck yeah. I'm always watching it, and again, I'm still dumbfounded that, I guess I can't be dumbfounded. I mean, I don't pass anything by this president, how he went off and pardoned Joe Arpaio. But yeah, I think this is definitely could be a big pickup for the Democrats. But like you said, she kind of leans a little conservative, but you know how it is. Sometimes you got to do some things to get those conservative bona fides and credentials and get to office. Governing tends to be different. I mean, look at this gentleman, Jeff Flake. The last couple of reports that I saw, he's down 27 percentage points to his opponent, and then with her, he's almost neck and neck with her. So I think it's going to be a long and hard fought race, but we'll see what happens. And only time will tell. But President Trump is not going to help out Mr. Flake. I mean, he attacked him the last time he was down there. So I think it's going to be an uphill battle, Mr. Flake. But definitely, I can see the Democrats gaining some spots here in 2018.
Yeah, now that'll be a really interesting race because in some of the conversations with very prominent Latino Democratic donors, Latino political operatives in Arizona, I mean, one of the things that the feedback I got was that they said, look, these were people, now we're talking about very prominent Latino Democratic donors that had held many fundraisers at their business, okay, for Kyrsten Sinema as she was moving up the political ladder, feel betrayed in many ways, particularly for her votes, her anti-immigrant or anti-pro border enforcement votes over the last few years in Congress. And one of the things that they were commenting to me, Leo, was, Senator Flake's a Republican, but he's someone you can talk to, and at least he's honest who he is. And the fact that Kyrsten has made this 180 in her political persona questions the authenticity. So it'll be interesting to see if she is the Democratic nominee. I suspect she's going to have a hard time mustering a lot of enthusiasm for her race. And so again, in the Latino community, it's not necessarily all about ideology, all about party. There's a level of authenticity, and you got to be consistent. And you got to feel like, and people have to feel like you really have their back, and that's something that we're certainly not getting from the current president, and that's why, as you said earlier, we're not getting enough from our parties, and that's why Latinos and a lot of people in general are being more and more, unfortunately, more and more disillusioned by the process. But we got to persevere and do our own thing, carve our own path. Leo, let people know what's on the Perales report this week.
Oh yeah, got some more city council candidates over here in the Tri-Cities. That's the name of our three cities over here: Richland, Kennewick, and Pasco. Yeah, that's on the docket, and I'll be talking more about the issue. I kind of come to the forefront. I'm trying to put together a good episode about Puerto Rico and people help out, either sending money to charities down there. So yeah, lots of good stuff, and I hope to provide more good content for my area. So please look me up on Facebook, The Perales Report, YouTube, The Perales Report. I would like you guys to subscribe to my pages and just look out for my stuff.
Well, Leo, we're going to continue to support the Perales Report, support you. I want to help get you some guests from outside of the Apple State there, so we can sort of expand your network. And if you ever invite me on the Perales Report, I'll go. Not that I'm begging or anything, but I'll go. I'll roll out there. We'll talk. You want to talk Mariners? You want to talk about? I'm down. We'll freak it. There's all kinds of stuff we talk about. With we want to talk a little Husky football, whatever. It's all good. Northwest gorges.
That's the only thing we can talk about is the Husky and Cougar football. We can't talk about the Mariners. They're not even in the playoffs.
Oh,
they were done 2 months ago.
Yeah.
We gave up on them.
Yeah. Well, I have a brother that has an odd fan. He's a Mariner fan. It's kind of random. Well, that's another conversation. Leo Perales, thank you for joining, being my co-host today. Look forward to continue to collaborate with you, and you brought a lot to the show. And again, thank you all for listening to Ray's Talk Show. You can catch this and every other episode of Ray's Talk Show. This will be the 259th episode. I mean, we have been grinding it for several years. It's great to see these new podcasts out there, but it's always good to be a part of a community that's been out here for several years, elevating people like Leo's voices in these debates, and whether it's politics, other hot issues impacting our life, and continue to support Ray's Talk Show. Again, iTunes, Twitter, Spotify, SoundCloud, anywhere you can download a podcast. Check us out at rayspodcast.com, on Twitter, anywhere on social media at Ray's Podcast, and you can always email us at podcastrays@gmail.com, podcastrays@gmail.com. Let's continue the conversation. Leo, we'll be in touch, brother. I think the sun's just going down where you're at in the Pacific, and you have a great week, and I'll check you out on the Perales Report.
Thanks, man. Everybody, peace, love. Puerto Rico, I'm with you. See you guys.
Gracias, hermano.